Hashtag Doggy People with Phil Lassman.
Hello, it's me, and welcome to Hashtag Doggy People, the show about life, love, and dogs. Now, even though he's shorter than me, my guest this week is a giant of animal welfare. He's a man of colossal intellect and passion, and as someone who's debated and influenced many different animal welfare and environmental causes. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to be totally out of my depth with him, but he's a lovely man. So wish me luck and give a rousing welcome to the legend that is Mr. Dominic Dyer. Hello, Dominic. I bet you haven't been introduced like that before, have you?
Not quite. I might not be. I'm not that much smaller than you. We'll have to stand when we can stand together again in the future. We will. We'll measure that. We'll measure it.
I'm actually really nervous. You're a great intellectual talent, and I'm someone who watches Top Gear. Were you a clever child?
I don't know. I was an imaginative child. I used to love poetry at a young age. I used to write poems, and I had a teacher in my primary school who really sort of cultivated my creative thinking. And I suppose that's what sort of kept me going in life. I have a great imagination. You know, I like to think about things in the broader sense, what might happen in the future, what human behavior is and our sort of relationship with the planet. So I suppose, you know, I was clever, but in a creative way. You know, I didn't like mathematics and physics and chemistry.
What influence did your parents have on you, do you think?
Well,
were they animal orientated the way that
like
you
being
are?
outside, you know, with dogs, and we had, you know, pet rabbits and guinea pigs and all those things when I grew up. So I suppose my parents introduced me to a love for animals and an interest in the natural world. They weren't sort of, you know, from a background where they were particularly interested in biology or science or anything of that kind. My father was an engineer. You know, my mum came from rural Ireland with a large family, with a poor education, really. So they were quite a mismatch themselves. They never held me back with all the things I wanted to do.
What I want to talk to you about, Dominic, initially is dogs, of course, because that's the theme of the show. And I know that you have got a tremendous passion about dogs. What do you think is driving the current demand for dogs? You know, it's gone through the roof, and the charities, the rescues, are really struggling to find dogs.
I think obviously because of the massive social economic changes that we faced over the last 12 months because of the pandemic has made many of us spend more time at home. That in turn has, I think, led more people to think, well, I'd like to have a dog to share my time with or to bring some more fun and, you know, happiness to my family in these difficult times. Are out walking a lot more, so it seems something they want. Maybe in that sense, I think that's led to a huge demand for dogs. And clearly we've seen the numbers increase. If you look at some of the latest polling data, though, there is a worrying trend that people could give up large numbers of those dogs. Many of them have been pedigree bought. Many of them might have been bought from people who are breeding under dubious circumstances, as we know. So there's lots of issues there. And then dogs being given up to organizations that just can't cope with the numbers. You know, we did see that in 2008 in the financial crash. I think there's a real danger over the next 12 months as we transition out of the worst of this pandemic, hopefully, that we will still face significant economic problems. And as, for instance, if people go back to work, they might think, well, I can't look after this dog anymore, or I've lost my job, I can't afford to pay for the insurance and the pet fees, so I'm going to give it up to the RSPCA or the Dogs Trust or whoever else might be able to take it. And we know there's a limit on how many dogs those charities can rehome at any one time. And then we've got the problem that, you know, as we saw recently, and I wrote an opinion piece in the Independent on this, was that the Freddie the Seal situation at Hammersmith Bridge, where the dog attacked the seal in terrible circumstances, had a huge amount of national media coverage. But what it did spark, and that's why I wrote the opinion piece, was a recognition that, you know, we have more dogs, and if people are not taking responsibility for keeping them on the lead or caring for them, they're killing more sheep, they're killing deer, they're killing wildlife. And that's a growing problem as well. And that sort of brings us on to that Tuck's Law campaign debate I've been involved with as well, where we're trying to get the government to move to make the scanning of microchips mandatory, to check for the owner and backup rescuers on dogs if just people bring them into a vet so say, I want to put it to sleep. Now, it might come as a shock to many of your listeners, but, you know, there are lots of vets up and down the country that will quite happily just put a dog to sleep without asking much in the way of questions about the ownership at all.
I know that you've got a beautiful rescue dog yourself. I believe it's from Romania.
That's right.
You're very passionate about the dogs in Romania and the dog rescue. Why actually does this mean so much to you?
Well, I think like many people, you sort of stumble into it, don't you? You know, we lost our dog. We had a beautiful rescue dog from Ireland. He was a Newfoundland half collie mix. We were trying to find another dog, and we'd gone to a few of the places, RSPCA, Dogs Trust type places, and it was quite difficult, the rehoming policy, and quite time consuming, and there were many areas that were a long way from our home. And it's my partner that sort of stumbled across a video. Someone in South Africa shared her a video feed of a dog on the side of a road in Romania. And she said to me, listen, I want to rescue this dog. And I thought, do you? I said, where is this dog? Or, it's in Romania. And said, how do we rescue it from here? And I don't think it's on the road. Well, I know it's this rescuer, she said, I've got the Facebook details of, called Georgiana Negu. And she rescues dogs. And I think if I ask her to go back and see if she can rescue this one, we might be able to give it home. So she got hold of Georgiana in Romania. We've never met this person. We've got to know her since. She's an incredible lady. And she drove, I think about 150 miles, wherever it was, back to it was near the airport. And she spent about 2 hours enticing it into the car, got it back to the vets where she lives near Brasov, got it all sheared off and checked over. We got her to do all the checks on it, all the vaccines and everything, and the DEFRA paperwork, and got it over here, initially to Wales, where it was, there's another sanctuary there that looked after him for a while and sort of put him together with a pack of other dogs. So he got more used to, being with people and other dogs. And then we finally got him to where I'm living in Milton Keynes. We've had him for 4 years now, but he's been incredible. So it opened my eyes to what's going on. And there was a lady called Daniela Popescu, who lives in California, of all places, who I got to know on social media, who was helping dog sanctuaries and other rescuers in Romania. And she said, listen, would you like to go over and learn a bit more about the rescuers, maybe do some writing and campaigning? And I said, yes. So she said, well, my partner's Romanian. I'm Romanian. We'll go back. We go every year and we'll sort it out. So, I organized with her. They did the driving and we traveled across the country for a week and just met, Georgiana, the lady who rescued my dog, but lots of other rescuers. There were massive protests on the streets for improving human rights and against corruption in Romania. A diaspora, people coming back from Europe and America onto the streets of Romania to bring about change. So I felt I was in a country that was at that tipping point, that people did want change. And I've since gone back again because, Alison Sambridge, who and Paws to Rescue, I've gone back with Alison, spoken at, animal welfare, wildlife protests, for the animal welfare movement in Romania and Bucharest, and done more work trying to, promote what Alison's doing, who in turn works with Georgiana, the rescue of my dog.
You've had the most incredible career. I can't keep up with you. I was exhausted just trying to read. What was the first job that you had when you left school?
My first job that I had, my father moved south in 1986 when I left school to work for Wimpy Engineering in Hayes in Middlesex, and we moved to a town called Leighton Buzzard, where my mum still lives today. And I started working on a building site, putting up aluminium ducting. That's what I started doing.
Really?
So I felt I needed to go into office work to get out of the rain, as my mum said. So I saw an advert in Evening Standard for the Civil Service Commission for clerks. I had a few O levels. I had nothing more than that. So an entry level position, and I applied and I got an interview. They actually sent me to the Ministry of Agriculture, and the first job I did in that was working in the legal department. First day in the job, had to carry some papers for a judge at Lincoln Crown Court who was dealing with an animal cruelty case, a dog that was poisoned illegally by a farmer. So you can see that I was probably very, very lucky that I ended up in a department of state, which really has led me to where I am all these years later.
Yeah. How did you go from being that, if I'm not being rude when I say humble civil servant, to becoming this absolute giant of wildlife protection and animal welfare campaigning?
It's a bit of a mixed bag, really. I was always interested. I said I joined the Civil Service Scuba Diving Club. I decided I was going to switch over to become a professional association diving instructor, PADI instructor. So I did all the training and did all that. And then a few of my friends, we opened a Soho Scuba. It was like a scuba diving club. And we started doing trips to Gibraltar, to the Red Sea, training in Britain and then taking them out, and to Israel to a degree in Alat as well. So yeah, that's where I started sort of getting interested in diving. That taught me about teaching. Then I went on to do more trade union work in the civil service. And I got the attention of Mo Molan, who's a friend of mine, because I'd started doing a little bit Labour Party. And Mo, as you know, was a leading figure in the late 90s, went on to become Northern Ireland Secretary, Northern Ireland Agreement, everything. And Peter Mandelson. So the two of them were looking to bring people into the Labour Party to do some young organising in 95, 96. So I basically still worked in the civil service, did trade union work, and then started to work a bit with the Labour Party to try and get Labour politicians in front of young people. So we worked with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. And one of the first things I did with them was take them down to Southfields. We did an event at Southfields School in London. With first-time voters. And Blair made his speech, and he was very good and always has been a good speaker, and he talked about all the things he was going to do in government. but it didn't really wash through them. It sort of went over their heads to a degree. And then when the questions came, they were all about the environment. They're about fur farms and whaling and fox hunting, recycling, many of which still very relevant issues today. So I remember speaking to a few people, the Mandelson and others at the time, and having this discussion with them about the need for Labour to address animal welfare issues. And I was one of those who sort of got them thinking about the need to look at putting together a manifesto, which they did do for the 97 election, looking at a whole range of issues, including, looking at cosmetic testing, for animals, using animals, the fur farms, which were closed, the Hunting Act, which came in the end, whaling and other issues. So, I suppose I got that interest in politics on one end, animal issues on the other.
I want to talk to you about the B word. And if you don't know what I mean about the B word, I'm talking about badgers. If badgers could talk, I'm pretty sure they'd nominate you as their king. You've done more for badgers, I think, than anyone else on the planet. How does the debate about badgers relate to UK farming and food production? Because I know that you're very tied in with that.
The badger debate was one of those things that really made me change my career, because I went to the Food and Drink Photo, so I said, dealing with rice to begin with, and then on to a load of other issues, organic foods, vegetarian foods. I spent 8 years there traveling the world talking about food, diet and health. Incredible area of work. I loved it. And then I went to work in the plant science industry. I became chief executive of the Crop Protection Association, working in more controversial areas, but important plant science with Syngenta and Monsanto and Bayer, big chemical businesses, looking at the use of pesticides, but also looking at seed development and all the things that farmers need to grow food. They were basically working very closely with the farming industry. They were my clients. And, towards the end of the Gordon Brown era in government, Tories were, under David Cameron, were preparing to try and enter government. They wanted to basically start badger culling again. And at that time, I was chair of the trustee board of Care for the Wild International, a charity that did work in the UK. People in that charity wanted to campaign on badger culling. And I remember talking to my board at the crop protection industry. I said, well, Dominic, you're very good, and we brought you in because of your background, green credentials, political connections. You do a great job for us, but you can't get on the wrong side of the National Farmers Union on badgers. They are clearly wanting to kill them. They have the government's ear on this issue. And if you start to confront them because of your charity work, it's going to get very difficult for us, and it'll get difficult for you, and you have to make a decision effectively. I talked to my partner at the time, and she's very committed, has always been, to my animal welfare, wildlife protection work. She said, listen, if you feel really strongly about it, and we've got savings, you're going to have to take a cut in earnings, but if you can go into the charity sector and begin to deal with this issue, then do it. I left a lucrative lobbying career to firstly go and work in Care for the Wild, where we did policy work on it, then to take on the chief exec role at Badger Trust, alongside the work I do at Born Free, which I continue to do, and became, a person that wrote, campaigned, lobbied, did interviews, and became increasingly that voice of this increasingly difficult debate about cattle and bovine TB and badgers.
Well, I've now got a very serious question to ask you, Dominic. What would you do if you woke up tomorrow as a badger?
I'll probably run for the hills. I love them. They're beautiful animals.
They are lovely.
Most demonized. And we I don't know what it is about the badger. We're quite fascinated by it. When I was working in the Badger Trust for almost 7 years, there was never a moment when badgers didn't come up. Donald Trump was obsessed by badgers. He used to ask his national security team about them. There's in books written about his obsession about badgers. He would stop meetings sometimes about really important issues to ask his staff about what badgers do. There were badgers issues coming up all the time. Aeroplanes were steered away from badgers on runways. They were digging up, football pitches, and towns are named after them. Villages are named after them. They're in the coat of arms at the Tesco, and they were in, when J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter, she put badgers into Hogwarts coat of arms. Wherever we go, badgers are there. I sort of became part of that, and the farming industry had that love-hate relationship with them. And often what you wanted to try and do was step away and just say, listen, they're a beautiful wild animal. We don't know an awful lot about them, but we should treat them much better than we do. They probably encompass that much bigger debate about the future of our countryside and our relationship with it. Because the poor badger has sort of, been paying a price for industrial farming, for wildlife crime, for our ignorance and stupidity, and yet all it's done is just wants to get on with its life.
Changing the subject from badgers to lions, you led much of the media coverage, re the killing of Cecil the lion. We're 6 years on from that dreadful event. Are we, in your opinion, any nearer to seeing the end of that wretched thing called trophy hunting?
Probably not, unfortunately. I think, we are pushing the government to commit just to stop the import of trophies from wild animals into Britain, and that's taken years. I think a lot of the problem about trophy hunting is this sort of greed and exploitation of wildlife for money. You know, in many countries, I'm afraid, South Africa being one that I love, because Africa is a beautiful country. It doesn't matter if it's an ANC-dominated government or the old apartheid regime. The one thing they had in common is that they wanted to exploit the natural environment, wildlife and farming to such a degree that, you know, things like trophy hunting just grow. They don't diminish in size. You get these arguments from, you know, scholars and scientists and people in areas of conservation who say actually there is a need for trophy hunting because it allows, you know, investment in local communities and conservation projects to be paid for. We didn't have trophy hunting, all this land would be left and there'll be no animals. But that doesn't really stack up. You know, organizations like Born Free have campaigned for years to say that actually the vast majority of money doesn't go into local communities from trophy hunting. It doesn't go into conservation. It breeds corruption, and that's what you saw with the killing of Cecil the lion. We shouldn't be in a situation where, for example, we've got less than 30,000 wild lions left across the whole of Africa. We shouldn't say that a certain number of those lions can be shot because that's the best way of protecting them. We should say all of the lions that are left need to be protected. It should be up to the countries that have those lions in their territories and also the international community to do everything they can to protect those animals.
To take the life of any living thing is against anything that I stand for. I can't bear it. Peter Egan advised me, because I wanted to go after trophy hunters and get them on the show so we could have a right good go at them all. But Peter said don't bother because they're all psychopaths, really. And, you know...
I agree. I think the sad thing is, as I said earlier on, there are certain people that will justify their actions who claim that they don't like trophy hunting, but actually it needs to continue. And people like me and you are just being, and Peter Egan and others are just getting, you know, too hysterical about it, too emotive about it. I don't think that's the case. I said earlier, it's an ethical issue to me. And we shouldn't be shooting and killing animals for pleasure.
I'd like to ask you about your friendship and campaign work with, now here's a bit of a name drop, with the Prime Minister's fiancée, Carrie Symonds. How close are you two?
Well, we got to know each other a number of years ago before she got together with Boris, really. And the reason for that was because she was very interested in animal issues.
Was she?
No, it's all animal work.
Tell us.
All animal. But, you know, to be fair, you know, this has become controversial, but it shouldn't do, in my view. And I constantly have this discussion with people about, you know, should the Prime Minister have a fiancée or to be wife or whatever will happen in the future that has an opinion on certain things? Should she be able to speak out on those things? I believe she should. I think, you know, if you looked at Dennis Thatcher, he had influence over Margaret Thatcher. You know that.
Of course he did.
Sherry Blair, you remember she had a lot of influence over Tony.
Sure, every, you know, partnership
that's
has
right.
influence.
So I don't think that Carrie's that different, but I think she gets criticised because she's picking on issues that have strong vested interests, be it hunting of foxes or shooting of badgers or trophy hunters or whaling. You know, she's picking on areas where, you know, I know from my experience that you do cause controversy. You're taking on some strong, powerful interest groups, be whole countries or industries. I remember, you know, talking to her about what she wanted to do, and she said, well, I want to be able to speak out on the things that I care about and do the things I care about, you know, as well as being the partner of the Prime Minister, who clearly has a lot of things on his plate. So I know she's working with Damien Aspinall Foundation now, and she still works with Oceana, the conservation group. But I do hope we see more of her speaking out. You know, she did do a good thing on badgers. You know, she intervened.
You regard her as a positive influence?
I do, and I've spoken about that widely and written about that widely. And if anyone asks me, I would say that I defend it. And you know, people say to me, well, you know, she's not accountable. But then I'd say, well, you know, in government, there's lots of people that are not accountable. She's done some good things. She intervened with Prime Minister on badgers, and that made a difference in Derbyshire, particularly in 2019. I'm very grateful for that. She's had influence over the Prime Minister's thinking on whaling, which is an area that I spend a lot of my time campaigning on. You know, she made sure that he raised issues directly with the Japanese Prime Minister at the G7 summit in Biarritz, which I think is really important. She's been great on some of the dog welfare issues. Not an easy thing being a partner of a Prime Minister.
No.
I'd rather have her in Downing Street talking up for animals than having, you know, her outside not having any influence.
Sure. You've recently said that Britain leaving the European Union could open the door to improvements in wildlife protection and animal welfare. What sort of improvements do you think will be made, and when do you think they're going to make them?
We've got the Queen's speech coming up in a few weeks' time. There'll be a number of areas there where the government will come forward with legislation, which is going to be quite groundbreaking. And all credit to Zach Goldsmith, someone who I do know I've worked well with him, both inside and outside government, I think has made a huge difference on some of these things. I think we are going to see a move towards banning live animal exports. I think we could see a move towards banning the sale of fur in Britain, banning the sale of foie gras in Britain. We're going to see, we hope, an animal sentience bill that for the first time puts in law, that everything that you do has to consider the impact and pain and suffering that it might have in terms of animals. There are some other areas like the trophy hunting issue, which will finally be addressed, we hope, in this Queen's bill as well. And also, looking at making sure the ivory bill that's taken a lot of time to actually implement will be implemented now to stop the sale of ivory products.
You've also said that Britain is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. I mean, that's a really big statement, Dominic. Why do you think that is? And also, what do you think, if that is the case, what can we do to turn things around?
Yesterday, the Woodlands Trust put out a very good report looking at the fall in wildlife, and habitats and bird numbers in our woodlands and the loss of woodlands in this country, which is absolutely incredible. Industrial farming, the continued shooting estates expansion with all these game birds being released that compete with other birds, the wildlife crime that brings with it, new roads, HS2 rail links, building new housing estates and developments. We've done immeasurable damage as a consequence to the natural world. And a lot of people look at Britain because if you fly over it or if you drive through it, it looks very green and pleasant. But actually, nearly 2/3 of the land outside of our towns and cities is agricultural farming land. And that has very little biodiversity in it at all. It's not a good picture. Can we change it? Not in the short term, but we at least need to be realizing the damage we've done and try and turn that clock back. But yeah, we have some real problems.
Is it true that you once met the now President Joe Biden?
Yeah, because
how did that happen?
I was invited to go out into the Democrat convention in Denver, Colorado in 2008 to run a debate, a world leaders debate, with what was called the Club of Madrid, which was a sort of a club for ex-presidents and prime ministers. And, I got access to the whole convention. I was drinking beer and eating tacos, and Jamie Foxx was in there. Steven Spielberg was in there. I sort of pinched myself, think this is history in the making. I'm looking down.
Wow, what an experience.
Barack Obama accepting the nomination for the presidency. One of the sort of areas we were looking at was the sort of geopolitics, obviously, and what, different countries were doing. And, it was a case of just trying to sort of reach out to as many people as possible. And we brought on the former UN ambassador for the United States. He'd been out with Joe Biden, who was Senate Foreign Relations chair at the time. He came to the event and was in the audience and was very critical of the Russians because we had the Russian ambassador to the United Nations on the panel, and it turned into a bit of a geopolitical debate about the role of Russia. And I remember Biden saying how much he distrusted Putin at the time, which is going to be interesting to see how that relationship comes together now. One thing I would say about Biden, having met him and done some things like that, was that he's a very, very steady, very focused, decent man who knows politics from the inside out. He's not a great orator. He's not a sort of charismatic Bill Clinton, Obama figure, but he gets the job done. But I don't think there'd be anyone that would have stopped Trump other than Biden. And I can't think of anyone at the moment that could maybe settle things in America. American politics has suddenly got quite dull. But they're dull in a good way because Biden's just getting on with it. I think he's the right man at the right time now. And I hope the world will be better because of it. And I hope his health holds up as well.
Well, that's the thing, he's 78. I mean, he looks like a lovely man. I'm sure he is, but he's a bit doddery and he does fall down the stairs a lot. Do you think he'll last a full term?
I think he'll do a full term. As to whether he will, hand over to his vice president, who I think is also a very good appointment. I think she's very capable as well.
Yes.
But I don't know. He's indicating that he might go on beyond it.
Who are the activists that impressed you most, Dominic? You know virtually everyone in the world.
Well, there's lots, aren't there? I have huge respect for Peter Egan. He does amazing work and he puts a lot of time and effort in. I've got huge respect for Chris Packham because, he's supported me in the work I've done, through my first book. He wrote the foreword. We've done campaign work together. Liz Bonin is another great person doing similar work. She's, been doing some great work, I think, looking at global plastic pollution and intensive livestock farming systems and, taking a sort of science background she has and trying to bring that to bear, looking at those wider issues. There's lots of people behind the scenes that you don't know. It's great to see Mark Jones get the Animal Star Award because, I've worked with Mark for many years and I think he's doing incredible work.
Why do you think that we should all help the next generation to stand up for animal welfare, the environment, the natural world? They need to have some sort of inspiration from us oldies, I guess.
I think you do. One of the things I most enjoyed about the 7-8 years I've worked in wildlife conservation is I got to know a number of young people who've been along the journey and they've grown up working with me and others, one of the things I most enjoy was going into schools and universities, talking to young people about my work, my passions, and why they need to stand up for the natural world. Or working with people, and I can name some of them. Maya Rose Craig is amazing, Bella Lack, James Miller, there's so many people out there, Alex White. They're writing books, they're blogging, they're turning up on our televisions or radio programs, and they are, to me, giving me inspiration, but we need to give it back to them. So I spent quite a bit of my time trying to get them into events over the years, give them the platforms, help with my contacts so that their networks got bigger, that people would see what they had to say. And I think that's important, as charities, NGOs, campaigners, people who have a certain age and experience, we need to open up the doors. People give you opportunities. And I think I feel at my late stage of life, I want to give that back. So it is wonderful to work with young people. I haven't got children myself, but I sometimes look at them and think, your parents should be very proud of what you're doing. I hope that in time they stick with it. I think the pressures on young people today are immeasurable. They have to be young, they have to enjoy life, but equally you're telling them that they need to think about the challenges ahead and what they need to do to make a difference to this world. So at the moment I'm working on an idea for COP26, bringing both younger and older generations together in a panel discussion about the state of the Earth, a question time event in Glasgow for the big climate change summit.
It is now time, Dominic, to ring my runny great big bell.
Well done, well done.
And that is a signal, it's a call to arms, really, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to give you 30 seconds to look directly into the camera. I want you to nominate your particular charity. Who is your charity today that you would like to nominate?
My charity is a small charity run by a lady that doesn't get any fanfare recognition, as she should. She's called Tommy, and she runs West Yorkshire Animals in Need. And it's a charity that runs various projects and sports projects, including Georgian Nagu to doing rescue work in Romania and many other wonderful animal rescues. It doesn't bring in a huge amount of money every year, but it does online auctions and it raises money. And I would really like people to give West Yorkshire Animals in Need support, because it's this type of small charity that makes a massive difference day in, day out. People are doing incredible work for animals, both in Britain and around the world.
So it's Tommy that we're working for today, then?
It's Tommy and West Yorkshire Animals in Need, yeah, and we will make sure some of that money goes, as I said, to some of the rescuers of dogs in Romania, including Georgian Nagu that rescued my lassie as well.
Cool. All right, Dominic. Well, thank you very much for that. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's who we're supporting today. It's Dominic's friend, Tommy.
Thank you, Phil. You do a great job. Really appreciate it. It's been wonderful. I was going to reach out to you, actually, and you reached out to me to come and join you. So it's a real privilege. Yeah. And keep it up. Just giving people an opportunity during these difficult days to talk about how they care about animals and natural world is so important.
I adore animals. I love the people who run these charities. I admire people like yourself, Dominic, who do so much for it. Dominic, you know what? I think you've just done my job for me. You've just wrapped that up really nicely. I can tell you it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today, Dominic. Thank you. Stay safe. And please keep doing what you're doing, because we need you. All right.
Take care. Thank you.
God bless you. Love you loads. Thank you, Dominic.
Bye-bye.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So that's the end of our show. And I thought it went well. Big thank you to my guest today, Dominic Dyer, a magnificent man. And now it's time to have your say. Tweet me, email me, heckle me if you want to. Whatever takes your fancy. Just get involved. Thanks for watching, and join me next time for some more #Doggy People. Stay safe, love your dog, and cheerio.